Thank you, everybody. Well, in the 1980s, my own leadership journey got off to kind of a quick start. My first job was as an engineer in a global manufacturer of computer chips and military defense systems. So, despite the rather unflattering attire, I actually was really happy. So, within 18 months, I was promoted to senior engineer, and about another 24 months, I found myself climbing the management ranks in this very interesting guided missile project. So fast forward a few more years, and I've got 5 patents pending, and I'm being told I'm being groomed for greater things in management. So what's my next strategic move? Well, I quit and I run off for the wilds of Alaska. So why would I do that? Well, the one answer is that I felt called to a different purpose, so it's sort of the noble cause. But there was another reason. I was paying a high price, and that was physical and psychological exhaustion. And that wasn't from the hours worked or the pressure. It was from the energy that was required to adapt to an environment where, if I wanted to succeed, and I really did, I had to continuously suppress my best feminine qualities. And I didn't have a map to show me a more constructive solution. So that started my quarter-century quest to understand how human systems change and grow. And I ultimately concluded, and as I'll share with you today, that one of the greatest, highest leverage opportunities of this century is the development of women into wise, capable leaders. Not feminine leaders, but leaders with fully integrated masculine and feminine capacities that make them 21st century ready. Now, I know that this can be a really uncomfortable topic. You know, the terms masculine and feminine, especially in English, they're very emotionally and politically loaded. Because it's very easy to confuse with gender, with male and female, but masculine and feminine they are categories of things, they're not people. But if you bring these terms up, you know, the mind can shut down. So what I'd like to do today is kind of beg your indulgence on this sensitive topic. Ask you if you start to feel bothered by it, just kind of be with it a bit for the duration of this talk. Would you be willing to extend that to me today? Can you nod if you are? Okay, thank you. Very generous. Plus, I wasn't really crazy about Plan B. Okay, well, let's just think of masculine and feminine as complementary universal forces of nature, like electricity and magnetism, hot and cold, the positive and negative poles of a battery. You know, they're meant to work together in both men and women. They're neutral, like two sides of the same coin, or two halves of a whole spectrum, kind of like our idea of the right brain and the left brain. We think about linear thinking, categorize that as masculine. It can crack a lot of problems, but if our problems are messy and ill-defined, then nonlinear thinking, which is categorized more feminine, that may be a better approach. And entrepreneurs have known for a long time that business success requires, in both men and women, requires high degree of rationality, masculine, and intuition, feminine, of competitiveness, masculine, and collaboration, feminine. Navigating hierarchy, masculine, social network, feminine. You see the pattern there? Okay, now it is true that on the statistical average, women are going to express the feminine capacities more easily and men the masculine. However, in truly nuanced, skillful leadership, in transformative leadership, these masculine and feminine capacities come together. They integrate into a higher order of functioning. Think about leaders like Nelson Mandela of South Africa, or Aung San Suu Kyi of Burma, or business innovators like Elon Musk or Oprah Winfrey. Now, let's take a look at masculine and feminine, kind of the big picture of history. So, the main thing to pay attention to here is that we're only about 50 years outside of this very long period of time, maybe 5,000 years, by that white band there, where most leaders were male, and most of the leading edge leadership capacities for that time were appropriately masculine, because that was the time when we were establishing cities and literacy and agriculture, all the way up to modern industrial economies. Now, our postmodern informational economy, in comparison, is very fluid, it's networked, it's more team-based, it's more collaborative. It's got a very feminine feel to it. But that very long period of masculine influence is very much coloring our world today. And in fact, for the last 50 years, women have been climbing the steepest learning curve in history. For that 5,000-year stretch, women were primarily leading private lives, and then mid-1960s, the doors open, women suddenly surge into the world, and they start building their masculine capacities like crazy. They've been doing it ever since. You look at that, it's no wonder we get so tired sometimes. But just in time to participate in today's very interesting period of planetary disruption and transition, which has set up a perfect storm of leadership challenges, because complexity is increasing like crazy, change is accelerating, uncertainty is pretty much near constant. And of course, there's been a number of global leadership studies saying, okay, what are our needs for leadership? What is the gap we have to close? Basically, they can all be boiled down to this: lack of that higher order functioning to meet these challenges, which we know can be satisfied by this deliberate integration of masculine and feminine capacities. So about 14 years ago, at my company, Core Evolution, we launched our first Women's Integral Leadership Development Program at university to do just that. And so after about 10 years of constant refinement and research, we ended up making one small change that ended up in a quantum leap in our graduates' performance and their satisfaction. What we started seeing was this higher order of function emerging spontaneously. So some of the examples look like this. Well, they were getting kind of like a heightened radar sensitivity. They're putting together their cognitive and their emotional capacity with their bodily intelligence, and being able to sense the subtle undercurrents in the room, gathering a lot of subtle information, so they were making better decisions. They were more artfully handling conflict and challenging people in situations of uncertainty. They were showing up with a more authentically confident presence, so that they were more present, they were more centered and kind of undefended and more at ease in themselves, so that when they were at meetings and they were with colleagues, they were with customers, they were starting to inspire a lot more trust and collaboration and just, people really wanted to be around them. In fact, some of the coworkers of our graduates came to us and said, you know what, I want some of what she's got. She's even starting to look better. And then they weren't just collaborative, they started becoming more strategically collaborative, because their perspectives widened. They started seeing the systems better. So as they were building relationships, they were also connecting the dots inside and outside the organization and outside their culture, and they were achieving their strategic objectives better. And then they started to dynamically steer their projects, because they became more flexible and adaptable. They started adapting their plans to emerging opportunities and sort of avoiding emerging pitfalls, but still keeping their eye on the big picture, so that over time their overall results were actually getting better. So, would you like to know what that one small change was? Okay. Well, to do it, I just want to keep my professor hat on for a little longer, because it does take a little setup, but I promise we'll get to some stories and results after that. You guys have been really patient. So, the conventional understanding of masculine and feminine is pretty binary. It's a pair of polar opposites. But in psychological development, we actually have two pairs of polar opposites. So we have a kind of fiery, active, dynamic form of both the masculine and the feminine. and we have a more stable, organized, contained form of both the masculine and the feminine. So the change we made was not understanding these four, what we call forces in the psyche. We already had that. What made the difference was the order in which we worked with them. As it turns out, the optimal leadership development sequence actually mirrors nature. What it does is it actually retraces the developmental pathway that occurs when these forces are first activated in the psyche from the time that we're actually a baby until we're a fully mature adult. And it kind of looks like this. It follows a figure 8 pattern, that kind of a continuous flow. So we start life out in the quiet containment of static feminine, at one with mother, at one with our body. And then in a few years, we activate dynamic masculine. And what happens is we assert our independence. We start to adventure and explore. Eventually we learn to achieve goals, to win. Then we need to take that fiery energy and focus and organize it. So this is about the time with the static masculine. So this is about the time that we're indoctrinated into the rules and roles of society, the traditional ones. We go to school, we get a degree, we get a job, we start to take on responsibility, all really good things. Now this is where a lot of women kind of get snagged. Now some of them will fully activate the dynamic feminine. And here what happens is they release a lot of creative potential. They're able to break free a lot of the constraint of the prior stage. They unleash this creative potential. They start getting in touch with their passions, their imagination, and their vision, kind of run with the wolves. They become more of who they actually are. And then a few of those are actually going to make it full circle, back to the static feminine, where they actually are able to ground this kind of creative wildness that they released into contribution. And so this is when you start to see the emergence of these mature adults with the gravitas that society starts to look up to. Okay? Now that's the ideal. What actually tends to happen in organizational life is more like this, where women get sort of stuck on the masculine side, so the static masculine boxes them in and the dynamic masculine overworks them, and they get cut off from their static feminine, basic bodily feminine foundation. It's kind of like the well that nourishes them. It gets depleted, they can't draw from it anymore. When they try to escape down to the dynamic feminine, they don't have the structure to hold that energy anymore, and they tend to go too wild, too far, get derailed, throw the baby out with the bathwater, kind of like I did when I ran off to Alaska. And then the likelihood of anybody making it around full circle to full maturity is pretty slim. So the good news is we get a redo. How often do you get that in life? It's actually possible to guide most women through a retracing of this developmental pathway in a relatively short amount of time in a way that's optimized for organizational leadership. And it kind of looks like this. We start out grounding in the static feminine. And we're not going to send people back to their mother. What we do is we guide women to reclaim some of their basic feminine nature, their physical well-being, their positive self-image, their intuition, and their body intelligence. We help them turn that on. They start to learn how to productively nurture people and projects. So once that foundation is in place, then they can sustainably turn on the fire of the dynamic masculine, where they turn on their drive, they start to get super productive, they manifest their goals in a way that doesn't burn them out or anybody else out that they're working with. Then it's time to systematize that. We help women build internal and external systems for productivity and scaling. And then they emerge from this with a really solid sense of inner authority that makes them very trustable and reliable. Then we are able to unleash the power, the creative power of the dynamic feminine for breakthrough innovation. And women love this. They are very satisfied by this, and then, of course, for organizations, it can be very lucrative. Once that's going, then we're ready for the culmination of stage 5, the integration. which actually kind of comes in two parts. We do the final return to the static feminine again. We reground, make sure the feminine foundation is really in place. And then we guide women in their actual jobs, in their work, through practice, to flex all their masculine and feminine muscles so that this higher order of functioning actually emerges. You know, it's not magic, it really does take practice. And so here's how that development sequence looks in a more linear form, a little easier to read. So this can seem like a lot, 5 stages, but if you could just do one thing, I would recommend you'll get your most leverage out of stage 1, grounding in the static feminine, because that is the sustaining foundation upon which everything else is constructed. And I think that this is the tragically missing link in women's leadership development. Okay, so what I want to leave you with are 3 essentials to accomplish this stage. They're counterintuitive, but they do work. Now, first off, to provide women a very safe, supportive, attractive environment, someplace nourishing to the senses. A retreat center in a natural setting is ideal, but remember, this is not a spa vacation. These women they're tackling the painful challenge of reclaiming atrophied feminine parts of themselves. For example, we had this one very accomplished aerospace manager we were working with, and she was so tough. She could have eaten a bowl of nails for breakfast. She came riding up to our retreat center on a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. She's all dressed in black leather. She's smoking a cigarette. And she comes up to me and she says, "I don't believe in any of this feminine crap." She said, "But my boss says I have to learn to play nice if I want to get promoted." Okay. So, you know, we start talking with her, and then a little while later, her eyes well up with tears, and she says, "You know, I just married a man who is raising a 3-year-old daughter on his own, and now I'm a mother." He said, "For the first time in my life, I really want to learn how to lead successfully as a woman, and I want to be a role model for my little girl, but I don't know how. I'm afraid." You know, it was not a luxury. It was a necessity to bring this woman into a very private, nurturing setting where she could, you know, and also surrounded by the beauty of nature, you know, not some bland hotel room, where she could lay down her armor, she could quiet her hypervigilant mind, she could connect with other women in a way that she could start to build some of those social and emotional skills that she desperately needed. Okay, number 2, befriend the body. Now, most of the women that we work with, they've either been neglecting their body or they've been overworking it to exhaustion for a long time. And we know that a positive relationship with the body is essential to psychological and physical health. Also, we know through neuroscience now that through our neuropeptides and the receptors that our body is actually one big distributed brain. So it can be our intelligent ally if we'll just let it. Now, Dee Coulter is a neuroscientist that I really like. She just came out with some new research that showed that true systems thinkers actually combine their analytical capability with their body's felt sense radar, and that is how they're able to grasp all the working parts at once in a problem. It's kind of like their secret. Now, we worked with this one very driven, very smart physician. She was building a successful holistic medical practice, and she was managing a team of physicians. But the irony was that she was haggard and exhausted and overworked, and her team was, of course, dysfunctional. You know, so we assigned her this one practice, daily practice that she described as hard and horrifying. And so this practice was every evening for 20 minutes to spend it in a beautiful scented bath, doing nothing except attending to her body with care and gratitude. No to-do lists, no multitasking. You know, of course, you know, she did a lot of other things in the program. However, that one practice turned out to be the unlocking move that actually helped her reclaim her vitality and actually opened her up into emotional connection. She was able to get more team building training. Her team started taking more responsibility for the practice. That gave her more time with her family. She started to deliver better care to her own patients because she was more rested, she became more emotionally in tune with them. She became happier and healthier. That liberated more energy for her to build her practice. So we had this really great virtuous circle going. And finally, mastering the art of centering. So stillness is the hallmark of the static feminine. I just want to taste that for just 1 second. So if you don't mind, just for 15 seconds here, I invite you to close your eyes and just take a very deep breath. And then just exhale and relax your shoulders. And do nothing but notice the sensation of your body pressing against the chair and your feet pressing against the ground. Just notice that sensation. Okay, now just open your eyes. Aha, here we are again. I was starting to feel a little guilty. I kind of had you up here with me, but now we're back home. So one of the most, after we befriend the body, one of the most valuable skills that our women learn is how to center themselves in the midst of the storms of life. They become still while still moving, kind of like an Aikido black belt in a randori attack like this. Now, with very deep practice, women become so present to their experience. They become so internally calm that they start to find themselves in the right place, at the right time, doing the right thing with a lot less effort. And so they start to notice that their universe is what we call the friendly universe. It's kind of reaching out to them in support. It's not because of magic or fairies or something, it's because they're so much more aware, they can see it. And they start to exude a quality that we call empowered, radiant presence, which starts to uplift people that are around them. So to close, what I'd like to do is show you why this static feminine stage is relevant not only for leadership, but also for our common future. I'll back to this again. Now, it may not be immediately apparent, but the unfolding of these ages of economies and leaders, kind of the nature of them, follows the same pattern of dynamic and static, masculine and feminine, as this optimal leadership development sequence. So what does that tell us about what may be coming in the future? Well, we know that this last 50 years has been infused by the dynamic feminine. It started with the women's movement, the women's revolution, and then it built the postmodern information economy, which is very dynamic feminine. So historically, every time we've had a dynamic breakthrough period, it's been followed by an organizing, stabilizing, static period, which would be static feminine now. So what can we expect? Well, we can still expect that the speed up of technology will continue. That dynamism will still be there, but layered on top of that will be this countervailing impulse towards stillness. You think about the Great Recession and then the long, slow economic recovery we've had. To me, that is an indicator of the beginning of this influence, this new influence of static feminine on the planet. Now think about two of our greatest existential challenges. We've got the global economy and we've got global climate change. Okay, so I predict that as this static feminine influence increases, we're going to start to want to redress some of these imbalances, and not just in Northern Europe. And we're actually going to start to get the collective wind in our sails to begin to build these comprehensive systems for environmental and economic sustainability. And not only that, we're going to start to desire to treat the earth like our collective body with much more care and attention. Not just to feel the responsibility to do it, that's kind of more masculine. This is going to be actual desire to do it. Now, men are going to respond to the static feminine impulse quite well. And I think actually women, though, are going to be really called to it. And that's why I predict that women are finally going to summit that steep learning curve they've been climbing for 50 years. And out in the future sometime, we're going to be looking back at this time and say, you know what? That's when the flowering of women's leadership actually happened, when parity began to be possible, because it just wasn't really the right time until now. And actually, if we think about the pattern continuing from in the big picture, we're only at the very beginning of what will probably be a very long, generalized feminine epic to kind of mirror that long, generalized masculine epic. So I propose that a window of opportunity is opening before us to really optimize this potential. You know, it's not a foregone conclusion. And so I say that one of the best investments that you can make for your organization and for the world is in women's leadership development, really supporting women to bring all of themselves to their role as leader, really supporting women to have the time and the space and the authority to engage in these practices to optimize their leadership development as I've described. Now, there is a pathway. It is counterintuitive. It takes some rethinking. However, if you can bring this into your organization, into the environments in which you work, you're actually going to be playing your part in history. And not only that, you'll be able to leave a legacy that has a positive impact that will last far beyond your own lifetime. So, we thank you.
Your figure 8, where I guess the step from 3 to 4 seems almost like a step where people leave their function at the time, because it's such a dramatic change. Being trapped in the boxes, I think you said, going to being liberated and free.
Yeah.
Is that a necessary step to almost leave your job or change function?
No.
And if not, how do you create that breakthrough?
A lot of times we get women that are making that shift and they're just so crazed. They think they're going to change their job. They think they're going to leave their husband, and, you know, all these kind of things. And what ends up happening is that when it's done in a more controlled way, they can release the creative potential into the places where they're at, and that's really what we help them do. You know, sometimes they do need to change their job or leave a bad relationship, but not always. A lot of times it's just that intensity of that liberation, and there's no way to constructively channel it.